You just went to see the doctor, terrified you might have cancer. But somehow, you feel lucky because you're here to see Dr. Farid Fata, one of the top oncologists in the state. You step into his office where he's seated across from you with an understanding look in his eyes. He starts explaining the results, but as the words come out, it looks like we're dealing with something serious. But we're catching it in time. Your mind freezes, focused only on one word: cancer. Don't worry, he calms you. I've seen cases like yours. We can start treatment right away. You don't question him. You can't. This is your doctor, the one you trust, the one everyone says can save you. He owns a cancer clinic with 7 locations across the state. He has privileges at the best hospitals, and big insurance companies pay him millions for treatments. So you agree to whatever he suggests, hoping for a chance to survive. But what if I told you this trusted doctor wasn't helping at all? What if every appointment, every test, every painful treatment was part of a scheme to make him rich while you suffered? He was a doctor who promised to help people, but he turned his patients' trust into a multi-million-dollar fraud at the cost of their lives. But how did one man turn hospitals into his playground and medicine into his weapon? How did he get away with this for so long? And what finally caused his entire operation to crash down? In today's video, I will show you how Dr. Farid Fata ran one of the most evil medical scams in history. And by the end, you'll not only learn the red flags that could protect you from falling victim to medical fraud, but also how all of these horrible things could have been prevented if only he hadn't made one mistake that ruined his life and the lives of thousands of people forever. But to better understand all of that, we need to get back to the beginning. Farid Fata grew up in Lebanon, a young boy with big dreams in a country full of problems and fighting. While other kids his age played football in the dusty streets, he stayed inside reading. He would spend hours with medical books, biology textbooks, anything he could find about the human body and how to help people. He loved reading stories about doctors who saved lives. He dreamed of being like them. He wanted to be someone people could trust, someone who made a real difference. When he finally left Lebanon and arrived in America, it felt like a fresh start. This was the land of opportunity, a place where anyone could go from nothing to becoming anything they wanted. And Farid had one big goal. He wanted to become a doctor, but not just any average doctor. He wanted to be one of the best cancer doctors in the world. He chose to focus on cancer because it was a field where lives were on the line and he could save people when they needed it the most. Farid worked hard. He stayed up late and studied for endless hours to finish his medical degree. Before long, he became Dr. Fata, an oncologist with big dreams and strong determination. He had everything needed to succeed. He was smart, friendly, and had a drive to be the best. But for Fata, being just a regular doctor wasn't enough. He wanted more. More patients, more money, and more fame. Soon, he found a way to get it. He opened his own clinic, Michigan Hematology Oncology, and it quickly stood out from other clinics nearby. While most other doctors worked hard to slowly build up their patients, Dr. Fata's clinic grew very fast. He had a way of making people trust him, a calm, confident manner that made his patients feel safe. His clinic was shiny and modern, filled with the newest technology and staffed by people who looked up to him. Dr. Fata made himself known as the best cancer doctor in Michigan. He worked hard to show everyone how great he was. His marketing was nonstop. His clinic grew bigger and opened in several locations, all in rich neighborhoods where he could charge a lot of money. But he wasn't just running a clinic. He was building something huge. With every new office, his name became even more famous. People saw him as a hero, someone they could trust when they were scared and sick. Other doctors whispered his name in hospital halls. Patients told their friends about him, and his reputation grew. He spoke at big meetings, made friends in the medical world, and acted like the very best. People would drive for hours to see him, waiting for months just to get an appointment. To them, he was their only hope. But underneath all this, something darker was happening. Dr. Fata wasn't just trying to be successful. He wanted to be untouchable. Saving lives wasn't enough for him. He wanted to build a huge business that made him millions of dollars. And as his business grew, so did his hunger for money and power. And that was the key moment where he would soon start destroying people's lives in exchange for a piece of paper. He knew how to work the system. He charged insurance companies as much as he could, earning huge amounts of money, while his patients went through one treatment after another. Over time, he realized that his reputation alone gave him the power to grow his clinic to incredible heights. As Dr. Fata's business got bigger, he became almost impossible to question. Everyone thought he was a hero, someone who couldn't do anything wrong. But the truth was much worse. He was someone who would do anything, no matter how bad, to get what he wanted. At first glance, Dr. Fata seemed like a man who achieved everything he'd ever dreamed of: a respected medical practice, a growing reputation, and a steady stream of patients who loved him. But actually, Fata was not satisfied. Cancer care was complex and expensive, one of the most profitable areas in medicine. For Dr. Fata, it was a gold mine. He realized that by keeping treatments within his clinics and ordering them frequently, he could maximize his earnings from every patient who walked through his doors. Slowly, his ambitions twisted his ethics. Instead of seeing each patient as a person with their own fears and hopes, he began to see them as numbers that added up to profit. Each diagnosis, each test, each chemo session represented another payment, another step towards his ultimate goal. Dr. Fata knew that getting patients to trust him wasn't enough. He needed to make sure they would never question him. He created a system, a careful plan to keep his patients and even his staff under his control. First, he used fear. Cancer is one of the scariest words you can hear, and he knew that. Patients would come in for a checkup, maybe feeling a bit off, but hoping it was nothing serious. Fata would look at them, his expression grave, and deliver the diagnosis: it's cancer. Sometimes he would add, it's aggressive, or we need to act fast. He knew that fear made people panic, and in that panic, they'd agree to anything he suggested without second guessing. Then he used his authority as a doctor to keep them in line. He would throw out complicated medical terms, explaining things in a way that sounded impressive and reassuring. Most people don't fully understand medical terms, and he counted on that. His patients were overwhelmed and frightened, so they trusted his expertise completely. After all, he was the specialist. He must know what he's talking about, right? He also went beyond just words. Dr. Fata made sure his clinics looked state-of-the-art, filled with the latest equipment. He wanted patients to believe that they were getting the best care possible. The clean, high-tech environment made people feel like they were in good hands. Everything was designed to make him seem trustworthy and professional, like a doctor who cared deeply about his patients. But his manipulation didn't stop with his patients. Dr. Fata needed his staff to stay quiet and follow his orders, even when they noticed something wasn't right. So he created a culture of fear within his clinics. Staff members who questioned his methods were blamed, humiliated, and even fired. He made it clear that he was in charge and that crossing him had consequences. People quickly learned to keep their heads down and do as he said, no matter how uncomfortable they felt. Fata even controlled the flow of information. He made sure that only he could explain test results to patients. He didn't want anyone else interpreting the data or raising doubts. This way, patients would rely solely on his words, with no one around to give them a second opinion. To add another layer of control, he made his patients feel completely dependent on him. He'd say things like, only I have the expertise to treat this, or I'll take care of everything, trust me. Patients came to believe that without him, they'd have no chance. They wouldn't dare seek another doctor's advice because, in their minds, Dr. Fata was their only hope. Through fear, control, and clever manipulation, Dr. Fata created a powerful trap. His patients trusted him completely, his staff feared him, and no one suspected the true nature of his intentions. He had woven a web so tight that no one dared to break free. As his wealth grew, so did his appetite for more. Fata began investing in luxurious properties, expanding his clinics, and creating the image of a medical empire. He started to see himself as untouchable. To Dr. Fata, his patients became nothing more than pawns in his chasing of wealth, lives to be manipulated, suffering to be exploited. He'd crossed the line, and in his eyes, there was no going back. As his empire grew, so did his belief that he was above the law, that no one would ever dare question his methods. He was in control. However, these lies didn't last forever, because there was one person who was brave enough to expose this scandal. In Dr. Fatah's busy clinic, there was one person who started to feel like something wasn't right. A practice manager, George Karadish, had worked there for years. At first, like everyone else, he believed Dr. Fatah was a great and skilled cancer doctor, someone who was saving lives. But over time, George started noticing strange things that didn't make sense. George had seen tough cases before, but something about Dr. Fatah's treatments felt wrong. He noticed patients, some of them looking healthy, coming in for round after round of chemotherapy. These treatments were hard on the body, and some patients seemed to get worse, not better. Why is he giving so much chemo, he wondered? Why are these treatments so strong and so often? At first, he ignored his doubts. Dr. Fatah was the expert after all. Who was he to question someone so respected? But as the days went by, his worries grew. He saw more signs that something wasn't right. Blood test results didn't match the diseases Dr. Fatah said patients had. People who looked fine one day were suddenly told that they had severe cancer the next. George knew it wasn't easy to question Dr. Fatah. He was not the kind of boss who liked being challenged. He had seen coworkers lose their jobs for speaking up. The clinic was full of fear. People were scared to say anything. But George couldn't stop thinking about the patients and how wrong everything felt. So he started gathering proof in secret. Whenever he saw a treatment plan that didn't make sense or a test result that seemed odd, he made a note. He kept copies of test results and patient histories, saving everything that might help explain what was happening. It wasn't easy. He was scared. Scared of losing his job, scared of being blacklisted, and scared of what Dr. Fatah might do. But he knew he had to try. When George had enough proof, he realized this was bigger than him. It was too much for one person to handle. So George made a brave choice. He went to the authorities. George contacted a federal agency and shared what he had seen, giving them all the evidence he had collected. It was a big risk, and he knew it might come with consequences. But George felt he owed it to the patients, people who had trusted the clinic with their lives. As the authorities looked at his evidence, they saw the same disturbing patterns George had noticed. Dr. Fatah wasn't just making mistakes. He was putting patients in danger to make more money. With George's help, they started a full investigation. They began pulling apart the lies and tricks that Dr. Fatah had built this career on. This was the beginning of the end for Dr. Fatah's empire. For the first time, cracks appeared in the perfect image he had created. As the investigation went deeper, the authorities found out that Dr. Fatah's lies were worse than they ever imagined. They had uncovered one of the most shocking cases of medical fraud they had ever seen. The team of investigators, including FBI agents and medical experts, started going through piles of patient files, treatment notes, and billing papers. They wanted to figure out how a doctor with such a perfect reputation could treat people in ways that seemed so wrong. What they found was shocking. First, there was the huge size of Fatah's insurance scam. He had charged insurance companies millions and millions of dollars for things like chemotherapy, blood transfusions, and other expensive treatments. But it wasn't just the amount of money that was shocking. It was the fact that so many of the treatments were not needed at all. Healthy people were told they had cancer just so Fatah could charge for treatments they didn't need. People who only needed simple care were given hard, painful treatments that took away their energy, their money, and their hope. As investigators dug deeper, they found one terrible story after another. Some patients went through many rounds of chemotherapy when they didn't need any, or just one would have been enough. They found proof that some patients were given expensive treatments right until their insurance money ran out. It seemed like Fatah was trying to squeeze every last dollar he could from his patients' pain. The stories from patients and their families were the most powerful proof against him. The investigators heard from people who had trusted Dr. Fatah completely, only to find out he had lied to them. Each story made the case against Dr. Fatah even stronger. They showed how much he created a web of lies so big and so planned that it was hard to believe one person could do so much harm. The investigators collected all of this heartbreaking proof, knowing it would help bring Dr. Fatah to justice, but also understanding the pain he had caused to so many people. When the investigation was finally done, the full truth about Dr. Fatah's greed was revealed. He wasn't just a doctor who made a few bad choices. He was someone who had built a multi-million-dollar empire on lies, pain, and betrayal. The day finally came when Dr. Fatah's lies caught up with him. Early in the morning, federal agents arrived at his office, ready to face the man who had built his success on his patients' pain. He was in the middle of his usual routine, seeing patients like everything was fine. But this day was different. As he walked down the hallways, the agent stepped forward, put handcuffs on him, and read him his rights. The arrest shook the clinic to its core. Staff members stood frozen in shock. Patients, some waiting for treatments, couldn't believe their eyes. The man they had trusted with their lives, the man who they thought was a hero, was being taken away in handcuffs. For years, people had seen him as a doctor who would do anything to save lives. Now he was being exposed as someone completely different. News of his arrest spread quickly, reaching coworkers, former patients, and doctors across the country. When Dr. Fata's trial began, the courtroom was filled with people, journalists, former patients, and medical experts all came to see how the case would unfold. The prosecutors didn't hold back. They showed piles of evidence that revealed how Fata had tricked his patients and used their trust to make himself rich. They shared charts, medical records, and billing papers, each one showing part of the carefully planned scam he created. Then the patients began to share their stories. One by one, they went to the stand and talked about what they had been through. Each story was more painful than the last, showing how deeply Fata's lies had hurt them. When it was time for Fata to defend himself, his excuses fell flat. He claimed he had been trying to save lives by offering the best care he could. He said his treatments, while unusual, were meant to give his patients a chance to fight. But the evidence against him was too strong. His words felt empty, and it was clear to everyone watching that his actions were not those of a caring doctor. Instead, he was someone driven by greed. As the trial went on, Fata's cold attitude made things worse. He showed little feeling and refused to admit he had done anything wrong. It seemed like he didn't understand or care about the pain he had caused. For the patients and their families, listening to him felt like being lied to all over again. By the end of the trial, the evidence against Fata was overwhelming. The prosecutor showed that he had used his title and position not to heal, but to take advantage of others. When the verdict was announced, there was a sense of relief in the courtroom. Justice was finally being served, and for the victims and their families, it felt like a long overdue end to their nightmare. The judge gave Farid Fata a sentence of 45 years in federal prison. This meant he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. For Fata, it was the end of his once successful and wealthy life. His medical license was taken away, his reputation was ruined, and his empire built on lies was gone. Instead of luxury, he now faced the cold reality of a prison cell. For the victims and their families, the verdict brought mixed feelings. Many of them had spent years dealing with the pain, both physical and emotional, that Fata had caused. Some had lost loved ones. Others were struggling with health problems from treatments they never needed, and all of them had been betrayed in the worst way. The sentence gave some closure, but it didn't erase the pain. For the victims, it was a reminder of the terrible things that they had been through. Yet, despite it all, they showed strength. They had survived even after being betrayed by someone they had trusted so much. Dr. Fata's story has left a big impact on the medical world. It showed problems in how doctors and clinics are watched over and raised important questions about how patients are treated and protected. After Fata was found guilty, many hospitals started working harder to protect patients. Some hospitals now make sure that patients can get a second opinion, especially when the diagnosis is serious. People are being told more often to talk to more than one doctor to make sure their treatment is the right one. The most important reminder from Fata's case is about being careful with our own health. It taught us that while doctors are here to help us, we should still ask questions and look out for ourselves. If a treatment seems too harsh or doesn't make sense, it's okay to stop and ask another doctor for advice. For me personally, it's just disappointing how he ruined his life after achieving such success. He grew up in a poor country and had very little, but he worked hard to leave that life behind and became a respected doctor. He could have lived a happy and peaceful life, but greed took over. He reminds me how dangerous it is to never be satisfied with what we have. Fata had everything he had dreamed of, but he still wanted more and lost it all. In the end, the doctor who pretended to save lives destroyed his own. If you enjoyed this video, check out another one: 11 genius scammers who fooled everyone and got rich.